Good evening, good evening. Welcome to the Variable Play Network. My name is Javi, and this is Sunday Night Magic. Thank you to everyone who's joining me this evening. Tonight, we have a interesting topic for everyone that may be watching. I see we have a couple of viewers tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. So tonight, we're going to be continuing my series of top 10 commander recommendations based on the color pie, or basically color pairings. So this is going to be the sixth episode already that we've been handling this, and specifically tonight's episode is going to be my top 10 Witherbloom or Golgari commander recommendations. And just to fill in that mood, let's just turn things a little green for a moment. So there you go. The top 10 Golgari Witherbloom commanders will be covered this evening. So pretty much I'm going to be giving 10 recommendations that I have either personally already played or have been building around. And again, these are just my suggestions. I will be monitoring comments for any feedback or anything that you guys want to share throughout the episode. I'd really appreciate any input from your end on what other like Golgari or Witherbloom commanders that you would recommend. So for background purposes, for those of you who are not familiar, Golgari is one of the guilds of Ravnica introduced into Magic lore from the city of Ravnica. So the Golgari is black and green aligned creatures. They serve the purpose of being like waste management for the city of Ravnica. At the same time, they also are in charge of disposal and also somehow like farmers, that they're rot farmers, that basically in waste there can always be bring new life. And Witherbloom is a school that was introduced in the recent Strixhaven School of Magic set, where Witherbloom is a school based on life force, nature and life force. Now, it is a matter of extracting life and also giving life to things, which is why they are also black and green aligned in a way that they do work with the dead and they also work with nature. So they're both similar, but one is really more on the study, while the other is on like their main purpose is really just to thrive on rot. So it's very different. Now, how black and green also translate into Magic the Gathering is that these are the two collections of colors that are very, very specific about pretty much recursion. They have a really great way of digging things up from the graveyard, either by reanimating it or returning it to your hand. So there's a lot of really good advantages that having these two colors together. You get a lot of redundancy and also get a lot of benefits of mana acceleration, because black has ritual effects and green has, of course, mana dorks. And then you also have some amazing removal spells and also some of the best shooters or search abilities in all of the colors. So black does that at the cost of life or sacrificing things, while green is specifically about creatures. Now, if you combine the two aspects together and the fact that pretty much we're talking about an entire faction built on sacrifice and rot and death, it fits perfectly for them. So let's go ahead and start up on the list. I'm going to begin with number 10. My number 10 recommendation is actually neither really a Golgari or Witherbloom commander, but fits into the black and green theme. And this is in the form of Chatterfang Squirrel General, who came from the Modern Horizons 2 set and is a legendary squirrel, which is interesting. So he's 3 to cast, he is a 3/3. What makes Chatterfang interesting is that he is Forest Walk. So if you are playing against any other player that is using green, you pretty much have a unblockable commander. Now, his second ability or static effect is really where everything comes into play. Chatterfang reads as follows. If one or more tokens would be created under your control, those tokens plus that many 1/1 squirrel tokens are created instead. So when you make a token, he also makes squirrels. And then pretty much what qualifies him to be a black and green commander is his final ability because it costs a black and you can sacrifice X squirrels. Target creature gets plus X minus X until end of turn. So for a single black, if you have the right amount of squirrels, you could essentially make Chatterfang bigger, make another creature you have bigger, or even just diminish the toughness of your opponent's blockers so that they go away. Now, I haven't personally built a Chatterfang deck, but there's a lot of deck lists that are going around that have very different approaches to this, but there's always going to be one mainstay here is that this is built around creating tokens. So, taking into consideration that green has a lot of abilities that create tokens. So, here on screen, I'm showing you Awakening Zone, which just every turn gives you a token. There are a lot of spells and destructive effects that also result with you having tokens. There are even planeswalkers that are built within the color of green that create elf tokens. So with Chatterfang's effect, you actually get squirrels on top of that. Now, from the black side, you also have like an example like Pitiless Plunderer that he creates treasure tokens whenever something dies. So it's a token. So you don't just have to be limited by creature tokens. Anything that creates a token will result in Chatterfang creating a 1/1 squirrel for you. So you can combine the two aspects and pretty much come up with a combination of creature token generation or just plain token generation, and with the benefit of having 1/1 squirrels. Now, what do you do with the squirrels? My recommendation would be to take two particular directions that you can go with this. They're pretty much expendable. For the example here of the Plunderer, you want them to die because you're going to get treasures. Now, you can combine other squirrels like Toski, the Bearer of Secrets, that he says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. If you have a bunch of squirrels, you can just go wide and swing at as many people as you want. If they'll block it, fine, they'll die, but you get to draw more cards. So you can make use of the army that you're generating. And of course, here, Toski, for example, is indestructible, so he's not going to die. And if you're using Chatterfang against a green player, he's Forest Walk. He's not going to be blocked either. So they're both protected. Now, with all of the death of your 1/1 squirrels, you can use taxing effects like Zulaport Cutthroat, and there's other examples that exist in black that whenever a creature dies, your opponents still lose life and you can even potentially gain life. So you can build a strategy that is really combat oriented, but in actuality wants to die. So it's a damned if you do or damned if you don't situation for your opponents. We are talking like one damage at a time, which means that you do need to generate a large army. And that's kind of why Chatterfang ended up at number 10 for me. That the build up to this may not necessarily be worth it unless you have the right pieces in play. But it's not going against anything that the deck can't probably do if you just have the right draw spells, the right mana coming out. And remember, Chatterfang's ability is for a single black, you can sacrifice any number of squirrel tokens you want. So something like the Zulaport Cutthroat can actually outright kill all of your opponents if you just have, let's say, 40 squirrels. Well, at that point of the game, you probably have already attacked them a few times, so you may only just need half that amount. So it is possible. Now, take all of these into consideration when we are moving forward into the other commanders, because there are similar paths and directions that you can take with them. But so going back again, this is my number 10 Golgari or black and green Witherbloom recommendation, Chatterfang Squirrel General. So before we proceed, let me go ahead and open up some comments. So very first one here. Hey, hi, Denmark. Good evening. Thank you for joining. Yes. So, yes, it's going to be green and black. So, two colors that are really, I'm going to say, the two strongest colors in Commander. So, putting them together, it's all levels of broken. And we have another one. Hey, Nan, thank you for joining. Good evening. Good evening. I hope you guys find the content tonight interesting. So let's go ahead and now move on to number 9. Coming out of squirrels, I'm going to be moving into another creature tribal build, so to speak. Moving into number 9, which is Slimefoot the Stowaway. Slimefoot was introduced in the Dominaria set, and funny enough, he's a legendary fungus. So he utilizes saplings. So similar to Chatterfang that dependent on squirrels, Stowaway here or Slimefoot pretty much is dependent on saplings. So whenever a sapling you control or Slimefoot, okay, so pretty much whenever a sapling you control dies, Slimefoot the Stowaway deals 1 damage to each opponent and you gain 1 life. So he actually has the life draining effect on your opponents built into him, which makes him a bit more efficient than Chatterfang. And he's even an uncommon at that, which means that he's even easier to acquire. He is 3 to cast, he is 2/3. I'm not really sure why I'm saying he, but we'll just continue. It means Slimefoot, fine. Now, the card also does have an additional ability here that for 4 colorless, you can create a 1/1 sapling creature, which means that you can the commander himself has the drain effect and has the ability to create saplings that you want to die. So all you have to do is kind of generate infinite mana, so to speak, and you can essentially make an infinite army of 1/1 sapling tokens that should anything happen to them, they also deal 1 damage to each opponent as long as Slimefoot is alive. So let's go ahead and see where we can push that to. I introduced to you the concept of Parallel Lives and Ashnod's Altar. So there is another card similar to Parallel Lives that is known as Doubling Season, which is pretty much you can interchange them both. But the reason why I chose Parallel Lives is because this effect really is focused on you alone and the token creation. So if an effect would put 1 or more tokens onto the battlefield, you put twice that many. Okay? Now, Ashnod's Altar also reads that you can sacrifice a creature and add 2 colorless mana to your mana pool. What does this all mean? If you use Slimefoot's ability to create a single sapling, you will actually create 2. Now, if you sacrifice them both to Ashnod's Altar, you have 4 colorless mana, which will allow you to use Slimefoot's ability to make a sapling, which actually comes out as 2. You sacrifice them again, and you pretty much have an endless loop. This is an infinite combo that can be assembled relatively quickly because you are using the colors green and black. What makes this just a little bit tricky is that only saplings cause this effect to trigger. So you really need Slimefoot to be in play. And of course, looking at these 2 cards on screen, Parallel Lives is 4 to cast, Ashnod's Altar is 3, so you're looking at 7. Okay, getting Slimefoot into play is also 3, so that's already at 10. You need to have at least 1 or 2 creatures that you can sacrifice to the altar. So there's a lot of pieces that need to go into this. But he does have the potential of becoming an infinite creature engine, and you just need a way to sacrifice them so that he can deal damage to each of your opponent and you gain life. So that kind of potential for an uncommon legendary creature really makes Slimefoot a very, I would say, under the radar commander that people may have overlooked, but has the potential of being really, really powerful. So number 9 goes to Slimefoot the Stowaway. Right? So we do have, okay, Slimefoot. Okay, I'm not sure what you mean by with it. No, he's not a clown at all. He doesn't look anything like Pennywise. No, but you basically have to look at it in a way that the saplings, fungus, and other creatures like that were introduced into original Magic lore that were like they're like replicating creatures. That it was actually some of the slowest strategy that you could play, but they never really took it any further than that. And on like the time spiral blocks and some of the special sets, they kind of brought in 1 or 2 abilities just to help out. But this is the first time that they've actually created a legendary creature that is specifically working on saplings. And interestingly enough, right after Slimefoot in the rest of the set for Dominaria, they did bring a lot of Saproling producers, which have been more or less staples to some decks and builds in Commander. So, I mean, they are expendable, but having a creature like this that actually gives you a benefit for whenever the Saprolings are killed or sacrificed makes it so much better. And okay, yes, thank you. I don't really think he looks anything like Pennywise, man, but okay. So moving on to number 8. This one is a little bit interesting in a way that it's brand new. It's still it just got released, so people are still working with it, but the potential of this card is wicked crazy. This is Old Stick Fingers. So Old Stick Fingers is a black, green, and X, which means that you get to pay any amount that you want for X. He's a legendary creature and reads as follows. When you cast this spell, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards. Put all creature cards revealed this way into your graveyard and the rest in the bottom of your library in a random order. And Stick Fingers has power and toughness equal to the number of creatures in your graveyard. That's fine. But if you are reading this, you have to maybe notice that it's worded very, very specifically in that you have to reveal X creature cards, not reveal X cards. So let's say, hypothetically, you only have one creature in your 99 cards. If you use Old Stick Fingers and pay 1 for X, you will actually go through your entire library until you reveal one creature. So it is abusable in a way that if you have, like, I'm going to build a black-green deck and have just 3 creatures that serve the purpose of running a single combo, that means that Old Stick Fingers can only really find those 3 cards when he comes into the game. And they all go to the graveyard, which, as I said in the start, is actually one really amazing resource for black and green because they have so much recursion in the form of animation or just recovery spells that are regrowth spells that bring cards back to your hand. To give you an idea of how broken this can become, Stick Fingers was just recently released, so people have only really been playing it recently and also like in digital form because the paper version of this hasn't come out yet. But what you're trying to do here is that you can take the approach of using Necrotic Ooze and Reanimate. So you want to cast Stick Fingers just for 3. So for X3, which means, okay, you're paying a total of 5. So black, green, and X is 3, which means that you're going to be looking for 3 creatures and you're going to put them in your grave. The most important one that you should be looking for is Necrotic Ooze. That it, as long as it's in the game, it has abilities of all of the dead creatures in your graveyard. Using a spell like Reanimate, you can bring it right into the game, and pretty much you're just going to lose 4 life. So once you have this in play, the other 2 creatures that just need to remain in your graveyard are 2 artifact creatures, Walking Ballista and Pyrexian Devourer. Together, okay, Walking Ballista has the ability to remove a +1/+1 counter to deal 1 damage to any target, while Pyrexian Devourer has removed the top card of your library, and that creature gets +X/+X counters, which is the number or the casting cost of the card that was removed. So you have the ability to make +1/+1 counters, and you have the ability to use them to deal damage. And since these 2 creatures are in your graveyard, Necrotic Ooze has both their abilities at the same time, which means that you can remove the top card of your library from the game and essentially kill all of your opponents as long as you have enough casting cost. And if anyone tries to do anything to stop you, you can still activate the abilities in response. So it's almost unstoppable unless they use abilities that have split second or such. So there's a lot of open abilities here that make Old Stick Fingers really good because he is essentially a buried alive, or a card that lets you look for creatures and put them into your graveyard. Okay, everything else gets shuffled into your library. So it's not, it doesn't really have that kind of purpose. It really is specific towards finding you creatures and putting it into your graveyard. So I see a lot of potential. I think people will be building this and it is going to see play because graveyard strategies are pretty much a mainstay in Commander and is really efficient. That Commander encourages people to play really big creatures, and there's nothing quite as devastating as getting them out for cheap and taking advantage of what they can do on the table, like even as early as maybe turn 2 or turn 3. So look out for Old Stick Fingers, number 8. Number 7, we move on to another commander that um, I haven't built myself, but have gone against twice already, and I am very impressed. That I actually kind of feel bad that I overlooked this card and did not get a copy for myself. And I'm talking about Lathril, the Blade of Elves. So Lathril is from the pre-constructed Kaldheim Commander decks. Is only available in like its foil version, I believe. But basically, Lathril is the commander card for the pre-constructed deck and takes elves to a very interesting place because black green elves have been around since Lorwyn, and we're talking years of multiple builds for elves. But what makes Lathril very interesting is that pretty much I'm going to say she. So she is a 4 to cast 2/3 with Menace, which means that 2 creatures are required to block Lathril, which in early stages of the game is difficult to put together, which means that she will most likely get through and hit a player. When Lathril of Blades deals combat damage to a player, you create that many 1/1 green elf warrior tokens. So she produces elf tokens for you, which again, going back to all of the other examples we did a while ago, you can double them up, you can use them as sacrifice fodder, you can use them to drain your opponents. So you can keep using the same strategies of black and green, but just apply it to different tribes. But this goes one step further in that if you tap Lathril and 10 untapped elves, each opponent loses 10 life and you gain 10. So essentially, this can hit all of your opponents for a fourth of their lives. And if it's later in the game, you might even already be taking a very big chunk out of their lives. And this is abusable with a lot of different effects, such as vitalize effects. There's even living creature or elf versions like this. I believe it's called a Copperhorn that pretty much will allow you to untap all of your creatures and then you can use Lathril's ability again. Or you can take that one step further and use creatures like Seedborn Muse that, okay, Seedborn Muse is a spirit and not an elf, but all permanents you control untap during each other player's untap step, which means that your turn, use Lathril, everyone gets -10. And all 3 of your opponent's turns, you can use Lathril again. That's 40 damage and you gain 40 life. So as long as you are building an army of elves, as long as you're connecting with combat damage, or even just casting the normal elves that you would typically have in your deck, you can essentially just have Lathril sit in your command zone until you are ready to begin activating the 10 life loss effect, making Lathril very lethal in the right circumstances. There are a lot of effects that will allow you to untap creatures. Like there is the Umbral Mantle, which I didn't prepare an image for today, but green has a great ability of producing so much green mana that you can essentially continuously untap every elf you own with something like an Umbral Mantle and just drain out your opponents. So there is, again, so much potential in this commander. I have seen it run twice, And once it did pull off that combo, and no one could do anything about it. I believe there was also a recent episode on I Hate Your Deck that another player piloted Lathril and actually performed really, really well. So, in terms of elf commanders or elf tribal, I think Lathril is actually a really great top tier recommendation for elf tribal. The fact that she can produce elves for you and has a way of actually draining out your opponents means that she's just not a producer. She actually has something to contribute in the late game, that it's like almost an outlet, so to speak, for what you're going to do with all of your elves. Now, unfortunately, in terms of creature type, elf noble, I don't really know what noble would be used for, but just elf tribal alone should be more than enough. Having great removal from black and green combined, a lot of control pieces, a lot of way to draw more cards and put in more elves into play. I think the only thing that really might be stopping this deck is that they just need to be able to protect themselves from massive board wipes that might kill all of their elves that they've invested their time into. So that would be number 7, Lathril Blade of Elves, or Blade of the Elves. Moving on to number 6. So number 6 is also a staple in black green, and is actually I would say one of really the original templates that people were running for black and green. And aside from Glisa, we have Marin of Clan Neltoth. So this is from the 2015 Commander set that had the experience counter mechanic placed on each of the commanders. So Marin is a 4 to cast 3/4 human shaman. So human tribal in black green is not really that big, but there is a lot of humans in both colors that you can work with. Now, the abilities on Marin read as follows. Whenever another creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. So you as the player get the counter, which means that even if Marin dies, you don't lose the experience counters at all. It stays. And it's whenever. So this doesn't have any limitation of just being once per turn. You can gain as many experience counters as you want as long as creatures are dying during your turn and that you own. Okay? Now, at the beginning of your end step, you can choose a creature in your graveyard if you have, or if its cost is equivalent to the number of experience counters you have. It goes right into the game. So, taking the old stick fingers example a while ago, you can fill out your grave really quick with black and green, and all you have to do is have a couple of creatures die. And guess what? Black and green is all about creatures dying and sacrificing them. Sakura Tribe Elder, or Steve, that people are more familiar with, is actually also a shaman, but pretty much sacrifices itself in order for you to go look for a basic land. Blood Pet can sacrifice itself and just produce black mana for you that you can use for something else. With the ability of Marin, you can actually even repeat these cycles and bring these creatures back in, and every time they die, you get more experience counters until you're ready to bring in the biggest creatures that you have. So this is a great reanimator build in that you just have to loop creatures. Now, I'm going to take a step back and show you one example. Walking Ballista's casting cost here, for example, is 2x, which means that if you don't pay anything for it, it comes in as a 0/0 and will die. That is already one experience counter that will be added to Marin. And at the end of your turn, you know what? Target the Walking Ballista again. It comes in as a 0/0. It will die again, and she'll get another experience counter. So you can actually work with a lot of creatures that you just want to die or sacrifice to a different ability. Going back to number 10, Chatterfang is also black-green and can be ran within the Marin deck. You pay 1 black and sacrifice as many squirrels as you want, and you're going to get that many experience counters. So the synergies between black and green and reanimating dead creatures can actually go out of control really, really fast. So something to take into consideration again. There's a reason why Marin even got featured in a secret layer for an alternate art, because so many people have been running this commander, and it is the quintessential reanimator commander in black and green. So number 6 goes to Marin of Clan Neltoth. Number 5 is a personal favorite that I would like to recognize one player in our pod. So Jonathan, one of our players here in our local EDH group, introduced me to the build of Nat of the Guilt Leaf. I like Nat because I did follow the story of Lorwyn. So it's interesting that, this commander wasn't really used, or pretty much prior to commander being a thing. No one played Nat that much. 5 to cast 4/4 Elf Warrior, okay. So again, you're going to see shades of cards that we've already looked at a while ago. This was one of the original Elf leaders before Lathril. And as you can see in the abilities here, is that Nath also creates 1/1 elf tokens. So he would be the predecessor to Lathril. Now his abilities read as follows. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may have target opponent discard a card at random. So if you're playing in a commander game, you have 3 opponents, and one card may not really have that much impact. On a 1-on-1, sure, that's significantly stronger. But every time an opponent discards a card, you may put a 1/1 green elf creature token into play. So, if you have other effects that would make people discard more cards, you'll get a lot of 1/1 elf warriors and can pretty much run again the same strategies that we've been looking at from all of these black-green builds. You can go wide with combat, you can go sacrificial and life drain, you can double up the tokens if you need, or in the case of Nath, you can also build one of the most oppressive and restrictive builds ever by adding in cards like Oppression that say that whenever a player casts a spell, they have to discard a card, which means that you'd get a 1/1 elf. Or, if you're running proxies or playing online, you can pretty much use something as badass as Chains of Mephistopheles. Now, it's really wordy, but the way that I would best explain this is that if you would draw a card other than your first draw for your turn, instead, you have to discard a card and then you're allowed to draw. If you cannot do that, you will just mill the top card of your library into your graveyard. This guarantees that if anyone tries to draw more than just their opening cards, that means that they're gonna have to discard and give you elves. You're gonna be able to build an army at a minimum of maybe 4 or 5 elves every table cycle. And the more that people try to cast spells or try to interact with you, you could be creating more of an army. So Nath is a little expensive at 5 to cast, but a 4/4 is still a really good blocker and can actually hit really hard too in the right circumstances. But this build is really specifically making a very oppressive table that makes casting spells almost near impossible. So that is, again, a direction that you can go with black and green. Black and green is not really a stacks color, but green has a lot of control for artifacts and for even graveyard, that you just add in the speed and tutoring that black can offer, and you have a pretty efficient control deck, I would say. Not at the level of that what a stacks might be, but there are a lot of builds that are known as like the Suicide Black or Sui Black, the Death Cloud builds, and you just incorporate the acceleration of green with this and even manage to build an army of 1/1s at that. So number 5 goes to Nat of the Guilt Leaf, and I'm pretty sure that, well, I'm hoping that once everyone can actually play Magic again in person, that I'll be able to go up against this commander one more time. All right, checking for comments. If you guys have any input, by all means, please share them. Much appreciated. So Number 4 goes to another favorite of mine that came from Commander Legends. This one has a following, but I personally have only met one other player locally that has been trying to build this. So maybe this commander will get more attention moving forward. But we're talking about Belby, or yeah, I'm not gonna say Belb. I'm not really sure how to pronounce the name. It wasn't really shared. I guess that's something that Magic may need to do moving forward, like how to pronounce these names. But so Belby, the Corrupted Observer, is a 2 to cast black and green 2/2 zombie elf. So elf tribal again kind of fits in here. But what makes Belby actually very interesting is that at the beginning of each player's post combat, so main phase, that means that after you've attacked, that player adds 2 colorless mana for each opponent that lost life this turn. So it's not just you, it benefits everyone in the table and actually encourages your opponents to attack each other because the wording here says for each of your opponents. So if they hurt your opponents, they get colorless mana. So it's an interesting approach or political tactic of deterring people from attacking you. But why do you really want to have this in play? If you could find a way to hit all 3 of your opponents every turn, you could be producing 6 colorless mana for yourselves, while your opponents can really only make a maximum of 4. So Belby has a very interesting build to it that there are so many cheap black creatures that deal damage to each opponent, and there are also a lot of enchantment and other effects, and even just like the death triggers that we were looking at a while ago, like Zulaport Cutthroat, that would still let everyone lose a single life. It's not enough to kill them, but once you go to your second main phase, Belby will produce 6 colorless mana. So as early as turn 2, you can produce 6 colorless. Let's say you put one of these guys down on turn 1. You put Belby down on turn 2 and attack with these guys. You get 6 colorless. And what do you spend it on? You can put down some of the biggest artifact creatures that cost 6, and maybe even later using the rest of your untapped lands, put even bigger cards. Or again, take the same route that Nath did and build something so oppressive with something like God Pharaoh statue and even other stacks pieces to control the table, and essentially just prevent your opponents from playing any magic at all until you just take them out. The potential here is so large, but it does require Belby to be in play. So if an opponent can control or prevent you from putting Belby down, or even prevent you from being able to deal damage, then you kind of face some issues. But if you're fast enough and know how to mulligan properly and get the right cards needed to start the game, you could put down some massive bombs as early as turn 2 or 3. So that is number 4, Belby, Corrupted Observer. Moving on to number 3. Number 3 is a personal favorite. I have built this deck and have enjoyed playing it to the point that it was really difficult for me to have to sort of deconstruct the deck and build something else. But, it is an experiment that I would encourage everyone else to try, specifically because I love the combo that this deck uses. And this is Dina's Soul Steeper, a representative of the House Witherbloom or School of Witherbloom from Strixhaven. Dina is a Dryad Druid, a 2 to cast 1/3. So that means that she's actually pretty good at blocking, so to speak. A 1/3 is pretty good in that you can take a lot of important creatures that are very quick and early. So going back to like our example a while ago of like Belby, who's a 2/2. Okay, Dina can actually block and prevent life loss. So that is actually one benefit to having her. Now, what makes her really good is her static effect that says whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. So as long as you find a way to gain life, which is what Witherbloom is all about, you can continuously pick away at your opponent one life at a time. Now, Dina also has the second ability, which is not that important, but you can pay one and sacrifice a creature. So she's actually a sacrifice outlet, which works great with some of the effects that we looked at a while ago, like the Zulaport Cutthroat and the life draining. So she is a built in life drain commander and also has a sacrificial effect built into her. How you can take this and really make it powerful is that there is an existing combo which I run often in a lot of decks that combine black, and this is the Sanguine Bond and Exquisite Blood. Basically, the two cards next to each other is almost self explanatory. Exquisite Blood reads whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. Sanguine Bond reads whenever you gain that much life, each opponent loses that much. So, if you manage to gain a life, or if your opponents manage to lose a single life, it begins an endless cycle of going back and forth until everyone dies. Now, the tricky part here is if you're looking at the casting costs of these cards, Exquisite Blood cost 5, Sanguine Bond cost 5. That is a total of 10 mana to run this combo. And they're both enchantments in your library. Now, you can technically eliminate Sanguine Bond from the equation because Dina reads the same. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses one life, and she only costs 2. So she essentially discounted that 10 mana combo to a 7, and she is sitting in your command zone whenever you're ready. So it's a discount, and it's permanently one half of that combo just waiting to be cast from your command zone. So I've ran it several times and have pulled off the combo along with other black green combos that you can build into the deck. But the fact that she is just a drain built in there, and as long as you can find a way to just gain a little bit of life here and there, have some lifelink vampires, or even just have some kind of tax blood artist effect, you could pretty much be hurting all of your opponents simultaneously to the point that they cannot expend any life as a resource anymore because it's just too much. So I've had a lot of fun building Dina, specifically on the whole Witherbloom concept of gaining life, but punishing your opponents for gaining life as vice versa. So it makes it really hard for them. And if you do use Dina's ability to sacrifice a creature, you can even pump her to deal enough combat damage that might also hurt more players. So that's not that important, but just the fact that she is half of an infinite combo that will just perpetually make everyone lose life is something to look out for. So I highly recommend trying to build Dina. I've had loads of fun playing this deck, and the fact that she can come out as early as turn 2 also makes the draining start so early. So let's move on to number 2. But just checking for some comments. Okay, now here we go. Hey, got a couple of this. Oh, hey. Hi, Jason. So we did talk about the pre-con commanders earlier, but no, Dina is actually not a pre-con commander. She may be in the deck, but she is not the representative of Witherbloom. I believe she is a legendary creature from the school of Witherbloom, but the commanders or even the deans for the schools did not make it into this list. Valentine wasn't that great, and the pre-con commander for Witherbloom is quite honestly very slow. So from all of them, the standout has been Dina, which I've had loads of fun using when I had my black-green deck built. I encourage everyone to give it a try. Number 2, by default, as most people who have been watching these episodes, I really do focus on one specific type of commander, and that would be the partners. So for number 2, I'm going to have to give it to Ikrishidiki, the Usurper. Again, the only reason why I do not make them number 1 is because they are not a proper representative of black and green. because one of their main advantages is that they allow you to play beyond black and green and bring in components of other colors that you may not really have access to. One of our players in my local CEDH pod runs Ikra Shidiki with Chrome Ludovic's Opus, essentially playing four colors. So it's it's pretty much a gateway to more options. But one thing that Ikra also does really well is that Ikra is a 5 to cast 3/7 and then has menace, which means that it's harder to block. And when it deals combat damage to a player, you gain life equal to a creature's toughness. Not just Ikra, any creature you own that happens to hit an opponent, you can gain life. What you want to do with this life? Ikra runs black which and green, which most likely means that you're gonna be running some of the most life draining effects like ad nauseum that lets you lose life and Sylvan Library that you can pretty much look at the top three cards of your library every turn and pay 4 life per card. Recovering life using Ikra's ability and just pretty much attacking with any other creatures that you have, as long as they connect, you gain back the life, which means that even if your plans for ad nauseum or anything totally fail, you do have a means of recovering, which makes Ikra a really great late game card if you need it. Black has so much effects that come at the cost of life that you're going to be scrambling to try to recover that life once the table turns on you. And Ikra is a great example of getting through. A 3/7 that costs two creatures to block, most of the time they're just going to take the 3 damage because you have to get the 21 commander anyway. So they're not going to do anything about it. And you're going to gain 7 life. Unless they have like 2/1/1s that they want to give up. Half the time, I would say that you will be gaining back life. And it's not just Ikra. All of your creatures, as long as they hit face. So if you have flyers, or let's say you have Doughty Voidwalkers that are shadow, you're also guaranteed to like gain 2 life from every attack. So Ikra encourages you to be more aggressive, which can speed up games and also complements the other strategies that we were talking about earlier today. That black and green has a way of going wide and attacking everyone, and even benefits if they lose the fight. So it's again a win-win for you, and also puts your opponents in such a weird situation that they could actually get hurt by defending themselves, if that makes sense. So this is, I think, a card that if you are looking at partners and want black and green in your deck, you should really consider using Ikra. I have Ikra in my collection. I have not ran Ikra specifically in like a competitive build. I have built Ikra in a black, white, green way. So just really primarily built on gaining life. And actually, this card complements like Dina and other effects that we were looking at earlier. That definitely she's above them in that you are open to adding other color combinations with partner. So number 2 goes to Ikra Shidigi, the Usurper. All right, comments. Okay, thank you, Jason. Yep. So if you're going to be looking into the Witherbloom Commanders, I don't suggest going the route of the pre-constructed. Definitely look up the maybe spoiler list from magicthegathering.com, and or even if you have any other specific sites that you go to, and just really filter out for the most played commanders. I use EDH Rec a lot to see how many people are building decks on certain commanders, to also give me an idea of what I might be missing. So if you are looking for a black and green commander, I mean, I hope today's list helps you, but there are so many other resources that you could look into. So we finally moved to number 1. Number 1 is, I would say, probably the most complicated of all black-green creatures, that I think explaining it to everyone tonight might take a little bit more time than needed, which is why I kind of sped up some of my explanation. This is what I'm going to call the beautiful mind of black and green, that you might as well bring out a chalkboard to explain how you're going to do everything. And number one goes to the Gitrog monster. So this is a 5 to cast 6/6 Death Touch Frog Horror. All of that together sounds great, but the Gitrog monster isn't really about attacking. Instead, it runs a very specific build that is actually um, alarmingly fast and also nearly unstoppable. If one or two cards make it through, you will not be able to stop it. So the deck itself, just to explain, requires you to cycle through your library multiple times. And the math behind it is very complicated. But I'm going to try to explain it to you just so that I can explain why the Gitrog monster is really, really powerful. Okay, so its abilities read as follows. The Death Touch set aside. At the beginning of your upkeep, you have to sacrifice the Gitrog monster unless you sacrifice a land. So every turn you have to give up a land or else the Gitrog monster dies. Now, you're also allowed to play an additional land each turn. So now you can play 2 lands every turn. And whenever one or more land cards are put into your graveyard from anywhere, draw a card. So every time you sacrifice a land because of Gitrog, you actually draw a card. How you want to play this is in a very specific way that Black and Green is also known for. The very first ability that was introduced into the combination of Black and Green is the ability called Dredge. And now, if you have the card known as Dakmor Salvage, it is a land that you don't even ever want to play. You just want to discard it because you have the ability to Dredge 2, which is that instead of drawing a card, you can just take the top 2 cards of your library and put it into your graveyard and return Dakmor Salvage to your hand. Using a discard outlet like the one that I have here as an example, the Cabal Initiate here says discard a card, it gets lifelink. You don't even care about what the card does. Basically, you just want to discard it, and when you do, it's gonna go to the graveyard. Gitrog Monster says when a land goes into your graveyard, you can draw a card. Instead of drawing a card, you are going to take the top 2 cards of your library and put it into your graveyard. And if any of them are land again, that pretty much you're going to trigger another draw. So what you're trying to do here is that you are trying to build a loop of netting one draw over and over and over again until you hit the point that you're actually going to draw out your entire library. And then from there, you should be able to win because you're holding on to everything that's in your deck. There are some effects that will be added into the deck that will make you reshuffle every time, which is where it gets kind of confusing. And trying to remember how many draw effects, how many lands went into the graveyard, it really is a very complicated puzzle that takes a while to master. We do have one very highly competitive player in our play group that does run this, and it's impressive to see how fast it runs every time. It is so consistent. So this is an immediate threat. Gitrog Monster is kill on sight. That the moment it is trying to get into the game or even gets into the game, you want to kill it. Or if you have a way of just removing, oh, sorry, I clicked the low. If as long as you have a way of removing Dakmor Salvage, you actually have at least a little bit of hope of surviving a fight against this creature. So, I think out of all of the 10 commanders that I've shown today and suggested, this one here is number 1 on my list, but is also a very difficult recommendation because the direction that this deck takes cannot really be applied to any of the other recommendations that I've listed today, but it's one of the most efficient ones. So it's really built for itself. You cannot take the pieces out and just transfer it over to a different black green commander. It doesn't work that way. It really has a specific line that it wants to take, and it is not for beginners. It is very, very complicated to explain. But if you are able to learn or also just have a familiarity of just how good graveyard manipulation is, black and green is the perfect color for this. And the Gitrog monster is really all about the graveyard. So, number one goes to the Gitrog monster. It's a hard recommend, but you cannot deny just how amazing this card is. So that pretty much wraps up day with my top 10 Golgari commanders. Thank you for those of you who joined the episode today. If you'd like to see any other color pairings that I've already covered, you can go into the Variable Play Network video library here on Facebook. And I believe we also have it on YouTube now. So you can go back to some of the previous episodes that I've already covered. There's at least 3 more color pairs that I have not yet covered, specifically Silver Quill, Celestia, and also Azorius. So if there's any that I did not mention, that means that there's already an episode for them. And I'd really appreciate if you guys would watch that, maybe give it a thumbs up and a comment too. Been seeing a lot of viewing activity, and I really thank everyone for your participation in these episodes. It's been 14 episodes now, Sunday Night Magic, and looking forward to creating more, and really glad that you guys are with me for the ride. So till next week, keep safe, keep gaming.